So very good afternoon, everyone. So I'm really honored to be here today to talk to you about some of the interesting income tax and fiscal opportunities that are there before you, offered by the government to help this industry. What I'm going to broadly capture is, what's the government of India's focus on the agri sector as a part of aspirational India, and then cover some of the interesting corporate tax rate regimes that are now available to you, get into some innovative patent box regimes, and Startup India, as I alluded to in the earlier panel discussion, a little more around that, and finally, touching upon those who may be interested in food processing, the schemes that the government has to offer. So at a macro level, I think everyone's very much aware about the Prime Minister's vision for India to translate into a 5 trillion economy by 2025. And as we all know, agriculture plays a very important role in that direction, given that you have close to 60% of the population working in this sector, but at this moment contributing close to about 35% to the GDP. So clearly there's room for growth, and that's where they're looking at doubling the farmers' income by 2022, so that once the rural economy picks up, it will fuel the growth of the urban economy too, naturally by virtue of consumption at a larger scale at the rural area. And towards this end, Niti Aayog in its paper has come up with 4 strategies by the government to double the farmers' income, including development initiatives around interlinking of rivers, supply of power, and then getting into technology and innovation, bringing out policies, some of which we even heard in this latest budget that was announced on 1st February through the 16-point framework, and then having institutions, because we all know that the farmers today are smallholder farmers in India predominantly. And hence looking at FPOs, looking at agriculture cluster developments and so on to help in a large-scale development of the agri-produce. I'm not going to get into the details of the 16-point action plan, but at a broad level, it's also looking about reducing wastage by bringing more warehousing into the picture, also looking at improving the connectivity from farmland to marketplace by bringing about, introducing the Kisan Rail projects and the Krishi Udan schemes and so on. In totality, the government's this year looking at an outlay of close to 2.93 lakh crores towards the agri sector, which should augur well for the farmers. So coming into the interesting aspect of the new corporate tax rate regimes, as we all knew, corporates were subject to a corporate tax rate of 30%. This was available for the longest period of time, and you could avail of deductions and exemptions. Alongside that, this is also available, by the way, to partnership firms and LLPs and cooperative societies. It comes with the additional rider that you can claim exemptions and deductions, some of which I will talk about in the next few minutes. More recently, the government also brought about a reduced corporate tax rate under a similar regime of 25% for companies who have a turnover of less than 400 crores. You just had to look at the previous year of financial year 17-18 or 18-19 to see whether your turnover was less than 400 crores for the same, but you can then avail of the deductions and exemptions. But as of 1st September last year, they brought about 2 new tax regimes. One is a 22% tax regime, which is also available to people like you who are into trading. And this just entails that you elect for that, and you do not then claim deductions and exemptions. Even existing manufacturing companies can avail of the 22% corporate tax rate regime if you wish to, and you would forego the deductions and exemptions if you're not claiming those in any case. So it's a straightaway reduction of 8% of corporate tax, which you can plow back for other purposes. And then you have an even more attractive tax regime, which is probably one of the lowest anywhere in the world, which is a 15% corporate tax rate, which is applicable only to manufacturing companies who are formed on or after 1st October 2019. And I think this is really, really attractive for those who are looking at getting into manufacturing, like we talked about innovative processing of, pulses or coming up with new R&D and then getting into manufacture of that, you can actually looking at setting up a new entity and avail of the 15% tax regime. The reason I also highlight for 30% the limited liability partnership, and it's something you may still want to consider, is the fact that limited liability partnerships are not subject to a dividend tax. Once you have the profits which are subject to tax at 30%, the partners can get the profits tax exempt. So if you are a partner in your own company, if you are a shareholder in your company and convert it into a limited liability partnership, you will not have the dividend distribution tax, which was there erstwhile, which will now convert to a withholding tax. Rather, you get the entire profits tax exempt. Now let's look at some of the deductions I spoke about when I was looking at a 30% or a 25% regime. These are very much linked to the kind of activities you undertake. So for instance, if you're also into handling, storage, and transporting of food grains, you will get a deduction of 100% of your profits. So it's an entire tax holiday for the first 5 years, and a 25% if you're not a corporate, or a 30% tax exemption if you're a corporate for the next 5 years. And there are no sunset dates for this, so this right now is an evergreen tax exemption available to you. If you're into also collecting and processing of biodegradable waste for generating power, and we do know some of the companies who are into food processing also utilize some of the waste to generate power for their plants and so on, then you can get 100% deduction from your profits for business of collecting and processing of biodegradable waste. And the third one is if you set up and operate a cold chain facility, or you set up and operate a warehousing facility for storage of agricultural produce, then you have a deduction of capital expenditure that has been incurred wholly for this purpose at 150%, which means for every 100 rupees that you spend, you will get a deduction of 150 rupees. So this is the capital expenditure benefit that you can avail of if you set up a cold chain facility or a warehousing facility for storing the agricultural produce. These are the tax exemptions or deductions available which have no sunset clause. Now let's look at those which have a sunset clause. So if you're now an exporter, okay, and you're looking at undertaking manufacturing or other services, you can think of setting up your unit in a special economic zone. This has a 15-year tax holiday. What we mean by that is the first 5 years, it's a 100% tax holiday. The next 5 years is a 50% tax holiday, and the year 11 to 15 is another 50% tax holiday, provided you plow back those profits into the business, so in an expansion mode. And we know a lot of companies who plan their affairs to ensure that the surplus profits are used for expansion in the year 11 to 15 to further extend the tax holiday for 15 years. The only rider for this exemption is that you need to be setting up this unit in the special economic zone by the year 2021. So that's something you need to work on rather quickly because we are already, right now in February 20. There's another very interesting exemption that is available for, which is a profit-linked deduction for agricultural producer companies with turnovers of less than 100 crores, but undertaking the following business, which is marketing and processing of agricultural produce of the members, purchase and supply to the members of agricultural implements, seeds, etc. for agricultural produce. So if this is what you're also getting into, and the government's pushing more for these FPOs and so on, then you get 100% profits of your eligible business for the financial year from April 18 to March 2025. Now let's come to some innovations. If you're talking about some innovations, you have the whole patent box tax regime which is available, which means that if you innovate and come up with some new interesting product or process technology and you patent that in India, then you get a very attractive tax rate of only 10%, which means once you innovate, you've created the patent and you then exploit that patent, perhaps by giving it to some of these large corporates which are interested in it, you get a royalty on that. You pay only a 10% gross tax rate on that income that you generate from royalty. The rider is that the patent developer has to be a resident in India and be the true and first inventor of that eligible patent. and 75% of the expenditure for developing that patent has to be incurred in India itself. Let's come to what we were referring to on the Startup India schemes and income tax incentives. So I think more and more the government's realizing that, if we are looking at innovation which happens by small corporates and so on, they need support. We had a very interesting question in the earlier panel about how do you fund some of this, right? So you can create a startup company, you register it with the government of India. It's a very simple process to register that company and your idea that you have around the startup. The rider is your turnover at the time you are setting it up should not exceed, when you're, as an innovation company, your turnover should not exceed 100 crores. Your company should not be more than 10 years old, so it should be a new entity by and large. And then you work towards innovation, development or improvement of products, processes, services, and should not be formed from an existing company where you're splitting up or reconstructing an existing business already. If you have that in place, there's a very interesting tax incentive where you can get 100% tax holiday for 3 years out of any 10 years. So what they expect is that in the initial years you may make losses. So there's no point in giving a tax holiday from year one or day one. So once you start making profits, you as a company can choose which of the years, 3 consecutive years, you want to claim the exemption from profits. There are also other benefits that the government offers. They have equity funding. They have a fund of funds created, and you can apply for that. Then they also have a liberalized procedure for obtaining overseas foreign borrowing up to $3 million a year with no end-use restrictions, unlike normal companies which have end-use restrictions on ECB borrowings. And then there is a benefit of self-certification for startups, for labor laws. You don't have to go through the rigorous processes. Similarly, you can actually run a startup from your home itself, and there will be no questions asked around that. There's a lot of fast tracking of startup patent applications, so you don't have to wait for a long duration to get those approvals in. And you get 80% rebate on your filing of patents, 50% rebate on trademark applications. When we talk about failing fast in the startup ecosystem, they actually have a very short window for closing down that entity. The entity can be shut down in 90 days flat. So if you feel you've tried, experimented, it's failed, shut down the operation. It is an absolutely open policy to do that. We talked about the tax benefits. It's a 100% tax holiday for 3 years consecutively in a block of 10 years, which is the latest budget announcement that has come about. You can also defer the ESOP taxation. So typically startups offer ESOPs instead of consideration. So, there are tax favorable regimes for ESOPs. And equally, dedicated startups sell within the tax department for any redressals. States also offer very attractive policies for startups, and they typically, like for instance, Maharashtra has a state innovative startup policy which sets out a policy for a period of 5 years up to 2023 for startups not having crossed 25 crores. So actually really looking at small companies who are looking at innovating in sectors like agriculture, food security, and so on, and they will support around this funding and infrastructure and other aspects. Now let's get to food processing. We do know that the Ministry of Food Processing Industries is very keen to have more food processing in the country itself, and therefore has come up with an innovative scheme under the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana, which was an amalgam of various schemes that in the past existed in up to 2017. The schemes provide for various elements, right from cold chain and value addition infrastructure to creating and expanding of food processing and preservation capacities, backward-forward linkages, mega food parks, and so on. What the scheme has to include is also grains, pulses, oilseed milling, processing, modern rice milling, ready-to-eat, ready-to-cook food products, breakfast cereals, and things, all that we spoke about over this conference. And what they offer under the aspect of food processing, preservation capacities, both for existing units which are in an expansion mode, as well as creating new processing units, is a 35% grant. If you are setting it up to a maximum of 5 crores. So what they ask you to do is prepare an application with all your expenses that you're likely to incur for setting up that unit. And then the government is funding 35% of the eligible expenditure up to a maximum of 5 crores. This is for all general areas. If you're in some of the northeastern states or looking at setting up in Sikkim, difficult areas, what they refer to as the Himalayan states, such as Himachal Pradesh, Jammu Kashmir, Uttarakhand, and other such notified areas, you even get up to 50% of the maximum of 5 crores of the eligible expenditure. So it's an application that you need to make to them. They will review it. It goes through a body for approval. Once that's through, they have a staged approach of how they will finance this grant. Besides the central government scheme, which is this scheme that we spoke about, you also have specific state policies and income tax exemptions with regard to food processing. So as we spoke about from a tax perspective, you can look at availing some of those other advantages, schemes that are there, whether you're looking at in a new manufacturing, think of setting it up in a new unit, a new company, and you'll get a 15% tax rate, which is really, really competitive. And you can also look at looking at negotiating with the states, because the states actually offer you a refund of the SGST for this, plus they give you various other incentives for setting up the unit in their state. And it's about negotiating with them. You've got to do it at the right time before you invest already into your project. So this is at a broad scale. We've covered some of the key incentives that are available to you, which you can actually consider when you're looking at business in future, because as you think about it, every rupee saved on taxes is something you can reinvest into your business from a long-term advantageous positioning. So this is it from my side. If you have any questions, I'm happy to address those. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Kasad.